This is the Physical Activity Researcher Podcast, a podcast for researchers of sedentary behavior, physical activity, and sports. Join for a relaxed dialogue about research design, practicalities, and, well, anything related to research. Learn from your fellow researchers useful and relevant information that does not fit into formal content and limited space of scientific publications. And here is your host, researcher and entrepreneur, Olli Tikkanen.
Welcome everyone. Before introducing guest of today's episode, I would like to note just a few things. Physical Activity Researcher podcast is committed to promoting equality and diversity in all its activities, including selection of guests. We have limited resources to scout all great researchers from different groups of people. So if you know someone who should be as a guest in the podcast, please ask this individual to contact us directly. As another thing, I would like to ask for your help. Being able to deliver this podcast to you, my audience, is based on how many people find, start to listen and follow this podcast. So I would really appreciate little help promoting this podcast. You can do this by subscribing, following the podcast on Twitter, retweeting tweets sometimes, and maybe even giving a good rating if you liked an episode. And now it is time for the actual show and introduction of our great guest of today's episode. I'm very excited about this episode as we are going to be talking about weight loss in athletes and how to maintain muscle mass in the process. Our guest holds PhD in exercise physiology and is currently working as associate professor in University of Jyväskylä in Finland. His main research interests are muscle hypertrophy, atrophy, metabolism, and signaling. He's also interested about sport nutrition and weight loss. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to introduce our guest, Dr. Juha Hulmi. Welcome, Juha. And to start with, would you like to tell more about your academic career?
Yeah, thanks Olli for inviting me for this very nice podcast. Well, I work in the University of Jyväskylä, and my PhD was about the molecular and physiological effects of resistance training with or without protein supplementation in humans. And after that, I focused in my studies especially on skeletal muscle in health and disease, and I started investigating how blocking muscle mass inhibitors, myostatin and activins, affect in muscular dystrophies in mice. Then I progressed into cancer cachexia, and I examined if adequate skeletal muscle mass can offer a protection against early mortality in cancer. And we showed in mice that increasing muscle mass and preventing muscle loss by blocking myostatin and activins in experimental cancer cachexia, it could improve survival rate in mice. This was part of a PhD thesis of Tuuli Nissinen. And at the same time, I have still continued to study the effects of exercise on skeletal muscle physiology and health. And then another thing I have recently been doing is, or a topic has been investigating how a strict diet in normal weight fitness competitors affects on physiology and systems biology. And now we have just recently finished our second data collection that is part of a PhD thesis of Ville Isola. So I'm still quite much interested in sports sciences as well, not just the physiology and molecular biology of exercise. So that's like, in brief, my research history, and I have done some other things as well, but that's how the main things about my research in brief.
Yeah, so basically the skeletal muscle is in the center, and then you have studied cancer patients, athletes, and different molecular aspects and nutritional aspects of skeletal muscle and maintenance and improvements. So what do you see as the most interesting line of research for you?
Yeah, Well, yeah, we haven't studied much of the cancer patients. I have to say they have been mainly studies in mice, but yeah, one study is ongoing in patients as well. But anyway, the main thing or most interesting, it's quite difficult to say. I think the importance of skeletal muscle has been pretty much the main point of my research during the last few years. But at the moment, I'm more and more coming back to the area of exercise science. So I would say I'm really excited about understanding how exercise works in improving performance, body composition, and health. So I would say that's currently the main interest of mine.
And in relation to that, you said that you studied the strict diet of, was it fitness athletes, and how it affects their muscle mass. Could you tell more about this study?
Yeah, so those are physique competitors. It's quite a popular sport in Finland, and so basically, as a physiologist, I have also used that as a model to investigate what happens if a normal weight individual starts this kind of a really heavy diet. So it's not just you can apply it to other sports as well, not just to those who conduct fitness sports, because in many other sports like the ones MMA and for instance what you have done, they involve often this kind of a heavy strict diet. So and also like many individuals before a beach season, they want to get into a bikini physique, it seems. So we were interested as a physiologist, also not just as a sports scientist, what happens, and whether after this diet the competitors are recovering. So we have studied. We have so far published 3 papers out of this first cohort, and now we have collected another cohort, and we have. I would say there are some findings that may be interesting for some of the listeners. Like for instance, it is possible to for some individuals to decrease a huge amount of fat mass without losing muscle mass. That's one thing. Another thing is that many of, or actually pretty much all of the physiological and systems biology level changes, like metabolomics, transcriptomics, and so forth, those are recovering when the individual after the diet is regaining back the weight and starting to eat again. So it seems that most of the changes, or even all of the changes, physiological changes, will recover after this diet, which is a good thing. So I'm not suggesting that everyone should do that, but it seems that our capability to recover after this kind of a diet is really, really strong.
And do you think there's a certain kind of time window that if you diet hard, how long can you stay in the lower weight, lower fat percentage before it becomes permanent? Or do you think it will, even if you would stay there 2 years, would you still regain the muscle mass and other physiological features?
Yeah, we haven't studied maintaining or maintenance of lost body weight or fat mass. So in these competitors, they are voluntarily increasing their caloric intake and decreasing amount of exercise to get back to the original weight. But I know from the literature that it's really difficult to maintain the really low body weight, And actually, we have now tried to investigate whether there are some molecular markers, systemic molecular markers that could explain some of the reasons why it is quite difficult to maintain the very low body mass, sort of like metabolic changes that are making our body to more easily increase body weight after this strict diet, because it's probably not a good idea to stay in this at this level such a long time. So those kind of changes we have been recently investigating as well. So, but I'm not sure if I can really answer to your specific questions. But those mechanisms that are making it difficult to stay there, those we have been investigating, like this kind of thermogenic adaptation, like related to sort of mitochondrial silencing and those kind of things. So Heikki Sarin has been conducting PhD from these systemic level and systems biology related biomarkers, and now we are about to submit a paper related to that phenomenon, what happens in blood mitochondria and leukocytes that could predict this phenomenon.
This podcast is sponsored by Fibion, a research device that has been shown to be valid in tracking sitting, standing, physical activity and energy expenditure. Furthermore, Fibion has been shown to be valid categorizing physical activity into light, moderate and vigorous intensity. In addition to scientific accuracy, Fibion provides automatically produced and easy-to-understand reports for research participants. Get scientific validation and learn more about Fibion at fibion.com/research. Fibion, from researchers to researchers.
And when you said that difficulty remaining in low body mass, how low do you mean? Is there a threshold in fat percentage or somewhere that what kind of low you are talking about?
Yeah, so I cannot refer to all individuals, but in these competitors, they are losing about 50% of their fat mass, and visceral fat can be decreased even more. So there is a there is a large decrease in body mass and fat mass, and the eventual fat mass or fat percentage is also low. So males can have body fat percentage depending on the measure at the levels of 4, 5, 6% or something like that. And females can have it, at least some of them can have it even lower than 10, but usually from 12 to 15 or something like that, which is pretty close to the ones that you can see in some other sports, like for instance 100-meter runners and so on. Or they don't have as low, but almost as low, and they have to maintain it. But I think this is just my opinion, but it could be probably pretty close to 10% of fat in males, and probably somewhere between 15 to 20 in females that could be maintained, perhaps. But it's quite individual. But those values could be perhaps maintained without problems in the metabolic health or another measures. But that's just a guess based on some of the data we have and in the literature.
And And you said that there's some adaptations when you go under it. So what happens physiologically when you go under? How does the weight gain then come about?
Yeah, so obviously in these individuals they are doing it voluntarily, but then even if they would try to maintain their low weight like for months, it would be quite difficult because there are some changes that are happening. So so for instance, we have published and the same way in the new data set. It seems that there are some changes that could predict what happens soon. So, for instance, there are hormones like leptin, which is reflecting the amount of fat mass and amount of caloric intake, for instance. So that those changes are quite dramatic. So so if I try to remember, so basically there is a really substantial loss of leptin during the last weeks of the diet, and then that would obviously affect on the hunger levels of the individual. So they are really hungry during that time point, making it difficult to maintain the diet. Another hormone that is often measured is ghrelin hormone, which is a hormone that increases hunger because leptin is like a satiety hormone. So basically, ghrelin can have small minor increase during the diet or at the end of the diet, but I'm not sure whether that's as substantial as leptin. So leptin may be more important, a hormone affecting on the amount of eating. And as I said, there are some changes in the physiology, like for instance how effectively mitochondria is producing energy. There are probably some changes in non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So those kind of changes that could be measured with physical activity measurement devices. So in the newest study, we have had some of those measures as well, but I cannot tell anything about those because I don't know. I don't have any data yet. But there is some data that suggests that during this diet, this decrease in physical activity, non-exercise activity, levels are decreased, and some of the competitors are nowadays, or their coaches have been trying to emphasize this to the competitors that it's important to maintain the levels of physical activity during the diet because that seems to quite substantially decrease in some of the individuals. So they are doing this voluntary exercise. So for instance, these competitors may do 8 even more exercise sessions during the week, but these other activity levels they may substantially decrease. And at the same time, if they want to eat more and more because of the changes in the hormones and then also the physiological changes that may make their ATP production more efficient, for instance, those kind of changes may make it very difficult to maintain this low body mass for a long time.
Yeah, it sounds quite logical that if you don't eat enough energy, the body will try to decrease the energy expenditure, not to lose too much weight or not to lose at all, probably. So there would be changes in the non-exercise activity. And yeah, really interesting points about leptin and ghrelin. when I have been losing weight for combat sports, I have noticed that when you are in a low fat percentage and the competition is over, it's maybe your hunger is not bigger in a normal state, but when you start eating, it's really difficult to stop eating. Like you just keep eating. And do you see that leptin could work this way, that when you actually start eating, it's just the body is just kind of, to me, it's shouting that keep eating, you found food. Like how do you see this?
Well, this is not my expertise, so this is interesting speculation. So I think we don't have any questions related to that, but we have to consider that in the future to understand, because there are some studies that have been measuring the time of eating also, so how fast you are eating certain amount of energy and so on, so those kind of things. So that's really interesting. So it's also possible, you don't get the satiety and hunger, they are not totally opposite phenomenon. So leptin is indeed affecting on the satiety, so you don't get the satiety so easily. So if that's really true, that there is not so large changes in ghrelin, which is a hormone increasing hunger, than in changes than decreases in leptin, then that may be indeed true, that this effect that you were mentioning is actually something that is happening. And it would be really interesting to have this kind of a question for the participants as well, whether this is really the main point there. Very good speculation.
And yeah, this is fully anecdotal, but sometimes when I've been doing, like, for example, long endurance things lasting maybe from more than 3 hours and on several days, it's interesting feeling that you have eaten like huge amount of food, you are totally full and you feel full, but at the same time you feel hungry. Like that the fullness versus hunger is not the same thing. And I find it really interesting, and there's probably explanation in the hunger hormones, but I'm not expert on those, so I don't know how they work. Do you have any guess how it could work?
Yeah, for instance, leptin is a hormone that doesn't, you cannot just, like, acutely, if you eat a lot, you cannot just get it back to the levels that you had those before the diet. So it takes probably a few days. We have some data now in these competitors whether it's regaining back after about a week of eating more, but I don't know the data yet, so how it looks like. But then, as you explained and I mentioned before, for instance, leptin is a satiety hormone, and if it doesn't regain after this just one eating, substantial eating, of course it doesn't just measure the amount of eating that you are doing, but it's also measuring the amount of fat mass that you have, and that's exactly the case with the leptin hormone. So you cannot just those systems, they understand that it's not enough just to eat once, but they are measuring that, or recognizing that you should still keep going during the next few days. So I think it makes really sense.
Yeah, super interesting. So basically leptin, it's not acute, but it takes probably 1 week at least to eat if you are in a low fat percentage. Did I understand it correctly?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. There are some studies, if I remember correctly, that also in few days some of the individuals may regain it. But then there are other hormones as well that are interacting, other hormones regulating hunger and satiety, and also other hormones regulating the level of metabolism as well, like T3, thyroid hormone, for instance, which is decreasing during the diet and getting back when you start to eat again. So, but again, for that hormone, I don't know. I don't have the data yet whether it comes back in some individuals already during 1 week. But there are many things, many changes, and also the physical activity. What happens to that? If you how I mean, some of the effects of the physical activity may be also partially perhaps acute, but I don't really know what happens and how fast is this level of physical activity coming back in some of the individuals. Those are interesting points, and they are probably informative for the exercise science in the future to understand better, because it would be better for athletes as well that they are the dieting and maintaining this competition weight wouldn't be so hard, so difficult. It's psychologically, you know it better than I do, than that it can make this sport really demanding, and so it would be really nice to understand these hormonal changes and other changes, so that competing in those sports would be easier psychologically.
This podcast is sponsored by Fibion. Fibion is an accurate sitting and physical activity tracking device and analysis platform. It is a great tool for projects that aim for behavior change in sedentary behavior and incidental physical activity. Fibion provides easy-to-understand PDF and web browser reports for participants. Other features include comparisons to recommendations, linking results to health risks, achievement cards, and interactive goal-setting tool. In addition, Fibion provides an API that allows for easy integration to other systems and applications. Learn more about Fibion at fibion.com/research. Fibion, from researchers to researchers.
If I go back a little bit, you said that for some people it's possible to lose fat substantially without losing muscle mass. Could you tell more about the numbers, and is there difference between individuals, and why do you think it's so?
Yeah, so that's indeed how it goes. So obviously it depends on the measure of muscle mass. So if we would measure and the timing of measuring muscle mass. So for instance, in the first study from these competitors, we measured the muscle mass after the individuals have had this kind of a peak week, which means that they are starting to ingest carbohydrates again, meaning that the glycogen levels and related water levels are getting back as well. This is important to understand because during the diet in athletes, it's really often that carbohydrates are restricted during the last few days, at least, when you have to do the fast weight loss. But then there is this sort of a pseudo loss of muscle mass, which is just glycogen and liquid, which can be quite substantial. So in this first study, we investigated that by measuring after this week of regaining or eating after this week of quite substantial carbohydrate eating, and this data showed that pretty large amount of female physique competitors, at least, can at the same time decrease fat mass and either maintain lean body mass or this vastus lateralis cross-sectional area, and some could even increase. Obviously, there is some possible measurement errors, but this is clearly possible, especially when the individuals don't have years and years of training background. So it may be more difficult if you have been training already like like 10 years, it may be more difficult. And it may be more difficult in males. It may be more difficult, more difficult to maintain muscle mass if you are conducting a really strict diet. So some of the individuals in physique sports and any other sports, they have much more fat mass to lose. And if you have a lot of fat mass to lose, and especially if the length of the diet is quite short, there is a higher risk for losing some lean mass or muscle mass as well. But especially in those individuals that can do this decrease of fat mass by usually maintaining the amount and intensity of resistance training pretty well, and then also probably maintaining amount of protein intake at pretty high levels. It seems that those two factors are really important in making it possible to do those two things at the same time. So there are not many individuals that could clearly increase the lean mass or muscle mass at the same time as losing, but maintaining. Many of the individuals can really maintain after this carbohydrate loading phase. So I would say out of 27 individuals, there are probably like 2 or 3, so about 10%, who can really do at the same time, who can gain muscle mass and decrease fat mass at the same time. Maybe that's the case in our data. It's quite difficult to know for sure, because there is always some individual measurement errors and those kind of things. But then there are maybe 5, 6 individuals who are losing both fat mass and muscle mass. It's again quite difficult to know exactly for sure, but this is how it pretty much goes. And so it's possible, but of course it's not really easy. And that was in female competitors from the last study, and now from this study that we have now conducted, we have also males. And I don't know the individual data from those, but it may be more difficult in males because they already have lower fat mass to start the diet, and they are going to a really low levels. Males are going to really low levels of fat mass. So it may be, our hypothesis at least is that it may be a bit more difficult for males. And also for males, usually the training background is they have more years of training. So for them it may be more difficult to maintain the intensity and volume of training and so on, and the muscle mass during the diet. But that's just a speculation. I don't have the data, but I hope that within a year, Ville Isola will and us, we will publish data from this cohort comparing males and females, and some of those results as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would have, without thinking it too much, I would have thought that the training background effect is the opposite, that you would think that people who have trained their muscles for a long time would maintain them easier. But now, as you said it's probably because they need a stronger stimuli to maintain the muscle mass, that it's actually the less trained who are for it's easier.
Yeah, I would say because those like the female competitors, if they have like 3 years of training backgrounds, they still have some capability to stimulate their muscles to increase growth even during the diet. There is still something left, some stimuli possible. But if you have trained years and years, it may be really difficult, and especially during the diet. Then it may be so, but I don't have really. This is just a speculation. So I as you said, it can be also in some individuals other way around.
Yeah, and this would be interesting for very unfit people who actually want to lose weight, and usually it's said that you shouldn't lose too fast because you will lose muscle mass. How do you think it will go with people who, for example, never have done resistance exercise, that they even if they have a strict diet but they do some form of resistance exercise? What do you think, what do you speculate would happen with their muscle mass?
Yeah, there are studies on those, and those studies have either just followed those individuals after this diet and what happens, and there are also some RCT studies that have, for instance, controlled the amount of exercise and amount of protein intake, for instance. But basically, in those studies, if you don't have this, exercise or aerobic exercise or resistance exercise, usually by caloric restriction alone, you will lose much more lean mass than if you would do exercise at the same time. That data is clear, and in those individuals that are losing mass and fat mass really fast, like for instance, there are studies in these TV show Biggest Loser competitors. So there are some studies that can be found. So Kevin Hall has been conducting those investigations in those competitors, and yeah, there has been some changes usually in those who lose their mass really fast. So if you lose more than 1 kilo per week, usually the loss of muscle mass is larger. And the problem during those kind of diets, like really, really fast diets, it may be that it's really difficult to maintain the lost fat. So there are some metabolic adaptations perhaps happening, maybe related to the physical activity and also to the nutrition, and also some other things happening that are not really like a physiological. So some things that make it really difficult to maintain. But yeah, these individuals are usually not trying to optimally decrease mass in a way that lean mass would be maintained. So usually the protein intake has been pretty low compared to the physical competitors of ours, and compared to also to the studies of RCT studies, and also the amount of resistance exercise has been usually in these studies very low. So for instance, there are these Minnesota starvation. There was Minnesota starvation study, which is really famous, conducted in the 1940s, following these males who didn't go into war, but just were investigated what happens in these camps of very heavy caloric restriction. And yeah, they lost lots of lean mass, and they were not eating much, so the weight loss was really fast. And then also they didn't have a chance to do resistance training or to eat probably adequate amount of protein. So yeah, that seems to be the case. But on the other hand, in those overweight individuals that are usually doing these diets, because they have this fat mass, if they would do this diet properly, it would be possible clearly to decrease fat mass and maintain or even increase in some cases of lean mass and skeletal muscle mass. So it would be easier actually in these individuals to maintain lean mass than in fitness competitors who have less of this sort of fat mass buffer.
Yeah, and what would you think that if you're losing weight, you're quite unfit person, should you do should you do aerobic exercise or resistance training? Because anyway, with the diet restriction, you can make a energy deficit. Do you think it would be better to do actually resistance exercise rather than aerobic exercise?
Well, there are many studies showing that for maintaining lean mass, for that purpose, and for maintaining energy expenditure, resting metabolic rate, and even the non-exercise activity thermogenesis, there is even some data for that, suggesting that resistance training is more important for that. But for some other measures of health, obviously, aerobic exercise is beneficial as well, and certainly aerobic or endurance training is better than no exercise at all during the diet. So that has been clearly shown. But if you have to compare which one is better, then for that purpose, resistance training would be more important. And I would say it's quite often forgotten in those individuals losing fat. So that's something to take care in the future, to remember this.
And you said that it's important for the maintenance of muscle mass is the resistance training and protein intake. But for example, in many sports, for example, combat sports, when you're losing weight just before the competition, you don't want to do heavy resistance training because it will make you slower. Maybe you can do explosive so how do you see that? How important is the resistance training, and what kind of stimuli would actually maintain the muscle mass? That if you cannot put the heavy loads, what should you do? What could you do?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and obviously these in overweight individuals, they don't care usually so much about the performance. But then for MMA and some other sports, you have to be careful not to do too much, too high volume and too slow type of resistance exercise. So as you mentioned, if you do it more explosively, you can certainly maintain the speed or even increase if you do that kind of a resistance training. So there is not good data to show which components are the most important for resistance training in maintaining lean mass during the diet. There are much more studies investigating which components are important in increasing muscle mass by resistance training. But if you want to maintain the performance of explosive performance and strength performance, then understanding the specificity of resistance training, then obviously the training should be as close to this training specificity phenomenon or principle. So meaning that you shouldn't do these exercises too slow. You shouldn't have the volume and amount of repetitions so high that you cannot maintain the intensity. So basically, you cannot produce force as much if you have those really high. So I would say that it would make sense that the intensity would be, and the quality of the workout would be really important for the performance. But then for maintaining muscle mass, obviously there can be some problems if the volume starts to become too low. But then this is a problematic point, and for performance athletes, its situation is different than those who compete for physical appearance or just conduct the diet. They don't care so much if they are for a few weeks a bit slower or sore from their muscles and so on. So
yeah. And so you said basically that the intensity is important for the performance, but the volume is important for the maintenance of muscle mass. Could you elaborate a little bit more on this? That how does it work, the intensity versus volume?
Yeah, well, as I said, it's for these weight loss studies there is much less data, but volume up to some point is more important for muscle mass gain than intensity. So you can, and intensity means the percentage of one repetition maximum load. So you can increase muscle mass with quite low loads, even if you just go close until failure. So just longer sets. So it would make sense that during the maintenance phase as well, that would be also more important to have high enough volume. So it's not just enough to do a couple of explosive sets and that's it. It's probably better than nothing, but there should be some kind of a volume of exercise to maintain the muscle mass during the diet. But it's really difficult to say. But for performance-wise, it's more easy to understand by understanding the specificity principle. So if the like in MMA, it's the situation is different than in weightlifting, for instance, because in MMA you don't have to produce so much forces, but you have to be really explosive, or the speed of contraction is really important. But then I mean, especially in boxing related sports, but then in weightlifting you have to produce much more maximal force. So it's of course taking into account this specificity of loading, then that's obviously really important. But you have to make some compromises probably if you want to perfectly maintain muscle mass. And I think it's not, if you lose half a kilo or 1 kilo of muscle mass, it's probably doesn't make so much a difference in those sports compared to acute performance that you have. So you have to be careful with these.
Thanks for joining us this week on Physical Activity Researcher Podcast. If you like the show, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing or following the show on Twitter. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. If you found value in this show, we would really appreciate a rating on Apple Podcasts or whichever app you're using. Or if you would, in a real old school way, simply tell a friend about the show. It would be a great help for us. We have a fantastic lineup of guests for forthcoming episodes, so be sure to tune in. Thank you all for your support and have a great day.